Mr. Mayor, I can still call you Mr. Mayor for a few more weeks.
Yes, you
for
call
a few
me Mr.
more
Mayor
weeks, but in
forever. I can still do weddings. I mean.
in a few more weeks, though, we'll have to change the address, Mr. General Giuliani, or maybe Mr. Secretary.
One never knows.
I want to come on to that and to some of the interesting possibilities that may await you in the Trump administration. But let me start, if I may, with giving us. I'd like you to give us your sense of what the immediate agenda is for the Trump presidency. And in particular, I want to ask you. So we've seen this this fascinating election campaign in which President-elect Trump won in large part by by tapping into this very populist sentiment that's out there in the country, but he won as a Republican, and you've got a Republican Congress, you've got a Republican House, Republican Senate. How is that going to play itself out? How's the populist moment, the populist insurgency, and that's driven President-elect Trump and the Republicans in Congress? How's that going to work out? What kind of policies are we going to see?
Well, I think you're going to see very much the policies he talked about. I don't think that's the hard part. So I analogize this election to the election of 1824, when Andrew Jackson defeated what was basically the almost emerging nobility of America, which were the revolutionary Americans, right down to, Adams Jr.
Sure.
And all of a sudden, the American people had had enough of this elite core and decided we needed somebody who represented us. And represented us meaning the people. So I think that's what happened here. I think the people revolted against what was the elite that was trying to force down on them a group of policies, a group of decisions either they didn't agree with or wasn't doing very much to help them or didn't address what they were concerned about. And Donald Trump, from the very beginning, had an instinct, and then his campaign helped with it, but I think a lot of it was his own instinct about what was really troubling the American people. So I think that's the small R revolution that's going to happen now. And now you have to institutionalize that. Now you have to. When I won election as mayor, I won by 3%. And the head of the Republican Party in New York, Bill Powers, came to see me the next day. And he laid out for me, he said, next time we don't want to have an ulcer while we're waiting for the election returns. We want to win by 10%. So here's how you're going to do it. This is how you're going to consolidate power. And we can take it through 8 years instead of 4. And I think that's part of what President-elect Trump has to do. He's got to take his agenda, and we're a three-part government. The other part's the Congress for his purposes right now. So you got to get it through the Congress. It's no good to have all these ideas if you can't get them passed.
But what are those key elements that you? Because throughout the campaign, Donald Trump talked about he channeled this populism, as I say. So he talked about he fought trade, right? He said free trade was not he opposed NAFTA. He said NAFTA needs to be renegotiated. He opposed TPP. He talked about tariffs on goods coming in from certain other countries. He talked about that. He talked about about limiting immigration, aggressive moves on immigration. He talked about this. He channeled this populism, this kind of nationalist populism. And at the same time, and by the way, he said things in the final week of the campaign about imposing taxes on companies that lay off workers. This is a populist message. At the same time, he seems to stand for a pretty, conventional Republican conservative position: deregulation, lower taxes, something that would actually that a lot of business people, I think, in this room would favour. So there's a tension here, isn't there, between this populism and this traditional conservative pro-business strategy. How is that going to resolve itself?
Well, first of all, the art here. I hate to go too much back to Jackson, but I mean Jackson's election led to the beginning of the Democratic Party.
Sure.
So he actually turned it into our really first vital political party. So now what he's got to do is accomplish most of his agenda and turn it into something where the Republican Party becomes the majority part. I think we already are the majority party in this country, but the majority party at the presidential level, which we haven't been since Reagan. We haven't been the majority party at the presidential level. And I think it's going to mean a combination of both of those things, being practical. There are certain things he has to deliver on because he promised them, you know, sort of the way Bush said, read my lips. He has to deliver on
which he famously didn't deliver on.
Right? You're right.
Yeah.
And that's
not perhaps the best precedent.
And that cost him the presidency.
Sure.
So he has to deliver on securing the borders. 3 years from now, we have to be a country that doesn't have wide open borders, dangerous people, criminals who are kept here committing crimes. He's got to show tremendous progress in that area. I think he has to lower taxes. He has to lower taxes on everybody, so everybody gets a little bit more money in their pocket so they can spend it. And he particularly has to lower the corporate tax, which I think could be one of the biggest things he can do to really ignite our economy, get it down from 35 to 15%. And then I think he has to work on repatriation of money by having a low bar of 10%. You do that, and within 2-3 years, you're going to see an economy that's growing at numbers where we can sustain a lot of the other things that we have to do. And I think on trade, part of it could be the rhetoric of a campaign. Part of it can be the misinterpretation of the media. But I think you're not talking about a man who's against free trade. I think you're a man who's against unfair deals, which I think he regards as the deal with Mexico, NAFTA, as unfair.
But do you think that would address the concerns of people in Ohio and Pennsylvania, Wisconsin,
yeah, because I think
who feel really upset and angry about what they see as the loss of jobs because of trade deals with Mexico and China?
I think the things I've outlined, including readjusting NAFTA, so you don't have things like we build a car in Mexico, in America, in Michigan, let's say, and we send that car to Mexico, and they put an 18% tax on it. They build a car in Mexico, and they send it back to America, and we put nothing on it. Well, that's a one-way deal. So how about we kind of even it out a little bit?
Right.
I think that's what he's trying to do. He's trying to make these deals fair deals so that we can both make progress on either side of the border. I think if you combine that with his general tax cut, his corporate tax cut, his repatriation tax cut, and fairer free trade deals, I think you're going to see a large increase in jobs in those places where he won, like Michigan, like Ohio, like Wisconsin, what we call unfortunately the Rust Belt.
So that tension between the populism, you know, the basically anti-Wall Street, anti-corporate sentiment, some of which Donald Trump tapped into, and the traditional conservative pro-business deregulation, pro-tax, that probably couldn't be better reflected than in the announcement that we had yesterday of these two first appointments for the administration. Reince Priebus as the chief of staff and Steve Bannon as chief.
Yeah, I love it.
Chief strategist. You know them both
extremely well.
I know
them really well.
And you know what different views they have. I mean,
great.
So Bannon, is an aggressive populist flamethrower. He thinks that globalism is destroying national identity, and he thinks that what he would like to see done is an administration that takes on these sort of globalist, corporatist, global capitalist entities. Reince Priebus is a much more traditional kind of conservative Republican. Who's gonna win that fight?
Donald Trump. I love that. That's exactly what I did when I became mayor of New York. I surrounded myself with people who disagreed with each other. I always thought it was a really bad idea to surround myself with people who completely agreed with each other because I'd never hear the other side of the argument. Donald Trump is an extraordinarily smart man. He has a great understanding, particularly of the economy. And I think exposing him to different viewpoints is the very best thing we can do. It's exactly what Obama didn't do, although he said he was going to do it because he had read Doris Kearns Goodwin team of rivals. He was going to put all his rivals in, and all he did was put in a bunch of people who had never had a job before, and got no advice from business. I know some of the people on his business council who used to complain to me, we only met once. We met one time, and they quit. So I think instead you're going to see a president who exposes himself. In the case of Reince and Steve, of course they have somewhat different viewpoints. But I saw them work for 3 months on the campaign as complete teammates, sometimes different views, but willing to talk them out. And ultimately, if they have a disagreement, you know who decides it, the President of the United States. I worked for Ronald Reagan, and I used to be the third-ranking official in the Justice Department. So I was a lot of cabinet meetings in which there were very, very big debates between Caspar, Weinberger, and Haig, Caspar, Weinberger, and Schultz, defense, state. There was only one vote. It's like Abraham Lincoln. When the cabinet voted against him, they voted unanimously against something, and he voted for it. And one of the cabinet members said, I thought this was majority rule. He said, it is. The president has the majority.
Sounds like Margaret Thatcher. It reminds me a little bit of Margaret Thatcher when she was... but let me talk about this, a little bit about Steve Bannon. I mean, there's been a lot of concern expressed today about some of the things that he's associated with. Breitbart, of course, the organisation he runs, has got a, let's put it, how do I put this, a reputation for some slightly robust, a slightly robust approach to news, and ways in which, frankly, a lot of people find very offensive. It's been accused of racism. It's been accused, to some extent, even of anti-Semitism. Is that something that, you know, you were mayor of New York City, you had to deal with these issues of racial tension? Is the way Bannon and Breitbart approach it, is that the right way?
I haven't seen any of that in Steve in the time that I've dealt with him. I've seen a very, very smart, very bright man, very worldly man. I also think something happens to you when the election's over. And I think you've seen it happen to Donald Trump, right? Happened to me when I became mayor. The day I woke up after being elected mayor, I realized, oh my God, I got to do this now. And there's a weight that falls on your shoulders, and you start to think in a somewhat different way. And it's not that you change your positions, but you begin to realize, I've got to bring in more people. I've got to listen to more opinions. I've got to broaden my horizons. I don't think that just happens to the president. I think that happens to the chief of staff, the policy advisor, the communications director, secretary of defense, attorney general, secretary of state. There's a different, when you're out there just criticizing, it's one thing. When you actually get on the inside, there's a certain weight of responsibility for the American people that is on your shoulders. And I think Steve Bannon is the kind of guy who gets that.
Have you seen
He's a patriot. He's a patriot. He loves America. He may have a different view of America than you do, but he loves America as much as you or I do. And I think he will give Donald Trump his best advice. And ultimately, it's the president who makes the decisions.
That change you talk about, the realization that you're now the president or the mayor, have you seen that in Donald Trump in the last week?
Everybody has. I think the whole world has seen it.
So in what way has he changed?
Well, from the moment he went to see Barack Obama, the way in which they dealt with each other, the way in which he's conducting himself, his attempt to try as best he can to bring America together. I think all these protests, I don't take them as seriously as some people do. I think they're going to go away. I mean, they're just going to happen for a while because some people are disappointed and they're angry, and a little bit is organized. I mean, a little bit is Soros funded and driven, but I think that's going to go away. And I think what we're going to find is a much more worldly and expansive president than we ever realized we were electing.
Let me just quickly ask you about a couple of specific corporate things, then I want to get on to some of the foreign policy issues, which I know are of increasing interest to you, if I may say so. But the corporate, not that you haven't always been interested in, but they could have a particular relevance to you, I know. But So one of the things that I've heard a lot, and I spent some time with President-elect Trump and with Steve Bannon and others, is that there is again this concern about big business, right? And again, it's channeling this populist instinct about big business, big companies, and this you have here. You know, this is the mother lode of big companies, Mr. Mayor. So let me tell you, is there going to be an assumption that, you know, that this is going to be an administration that is going to take on some of these big business issues? Let me ask you, for example, particularly, there's a big merger that's been announced that may go through, AT&T, Time Warner. You could be Attorney General. It could come up on your ledger as in the antitrust department. Something like, are these big mergers going to be opposed by the Trump administration?
Well, first of all, I won't be Attorney General.
You won't be Attorney General.
So good. I won't have to decide that one. Okay. Thank God.
Made that clear.
So I can escape that one.
I should ask Jeff Sessions that question, should I?
Wouldn't be a bad idea, but I don't know who's going to be Attorney General. I was the third-ranking official in the Justice Department under Ronald Reagan, but I ran the criminal side of the Justice Department. Although I have litigated 3 or 4 antitrust cases for AT&T way back when there was the big AT&T. So I think you'll see pretty much a conservative approach to antitrust law. If it's predatory pricing, where there are alternatives, you'll probably see a challenge to it. If it's a situation in which there's no alternative but a large conglomerate, I think you'll see the Justice Department passing on that. I think what you'll see is pretty much the traditional Republican approach to the antitrust division, like we had under Reagan and Bush. I don't think you're going to see.
That's pretty accommodating.
I don't think you're going to. The last thing in the world you're going to see is an anti-business administration.
Right.
Donald Trump realizes that he got elected to a very large extent on something he said in so many speeches: jobs, jobs, jobs. I understood this as mayor of New York. The only way I get jobs is by having businesses. Right? If I throw businesses out of my country, I'm not going to have jobs. So being pro-business is being pro-jobs. And I think one of the big changes that's going to happen immediately is, instead of having in Washington an administration that is anti-business, which the Obama administration was aggressively anti-business, you're going to have one that is aggressively pro-business. That doesn't mean there won't be a necessary level of regulation. But I'll tell you one thing that President-elect Trump told me as we traveled. He said, you know, one of the things I learned over running for president, when I began, I thought the biggest concern that businesses had was taxes. He said, it's true, they are concerned about taxes, particularly our highest tax rate in the world, 35%, and Ireland being only 12%. He said, but what I learned is, what they tell me is their biggest concern is regulation. And I'm going to cut those damn regulations in half. And I bet you anything you want that within 3 months you're going to see that regulatory burden. And being a lawyer in private practice, that is not good for law firms. Yeah. Because we loved all those regulations, because we made a lot of money on them. But the reality is that was killing job production in America more than anything else. EPA pretending it was Congress. Other agencies of government legislating rules, and Dodd-Frank. Dodd-Frank, excuse me, but we're now allowed to talk in politically incorrect terms, right? Yeah, that's part of the revolution.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
We can now talk politically incorrectly. Dodd-Frank doesn't have a damn thing to do with the 07, whatever you want to call it, recession, crash, or whatever.
Crisis, yeah.
It has to do with a bunch of liberal ideas that 2 of the guys that created the Don problem in the first place, Dodd and Frank. I mean, Frank was the guy that was protecting Fannie and Freddie when Clinton wanted to reform it.
Yeah.
And Frank stopped Bush from reforming it. And Dodd got a sweetheart loan from them. I think it's the biggest irony in American history that we named the legislation to solve our 07 crash over the two people who probably had the most to do with it. And everything in it is largely irrelevant to why that took place in the first place.
We have Elizabeth Warren coming to speak to us tomorrow.
Yeah, well, you go ask her that.
She'll have some...
We'd be very happy to run against her in 4 years.
Quick couple of questions. There's an interesting tip there, by the way. I hope you got that. Quick couple of questions before I get on some of these foreign policy issues. During the campaign, President-elect Trump said that he would appoint a special prosecutor to investigate and possibly prosecute Hillary Clinton over the emails and Clinton Foundation stuff. Is he going to?
I think that's a decision, I've always told him this, I think that's a decision he should make when he appoints an attorney general. The attorney general should sit down and study it and give him a very reasoned balance of two things. One, and they're both important. I don't want to minimize either one. One is the idea that we don't want to become a country where we have political vindictiveness after an election. Number two, we also don't want to be a country of unequal protection of the law. And a lot of that has to do with what I don't know, which is how bad are the things involved in the Clinton Foundation investigation? How beyond the pale are they? And I think that's going to fall to a large extent on the Attorney General. If the Attorney General decides that they're not that far beyond the pale, maybe we just put it behind us. If the Attorney General decides that they have to be investigated, then it shouldn't be Donald Trump's Attorney General. It should be an independent counsel who investigates it. But I think that has to be a very detailed, reasoned study of the FBI investigation that I believe is in the New York office of the FBI.
Okay, that's foreign policy. For those who are not familiar with it, the Wall Street Journal reported earlier this afternoon that the choice for Secretary of State in the Trump administration is down to Rudolph Giuliani and John Bolton. We don't have John Bolton here tonight, so I'm going to ask you some questions about...
John would be a very good choice.
Is there anybody better?
Maybe me, I don't know.
So let me try and channel what some of these confirmation hearings will be like. Let's start with Iran.
Okay.
Again, President Trump said the Iran deal that President Obama struck was a disaster for the country. I think he described it as the worst deal possibly he'd ever seen in his life, and certainly the worst deal ever constructed on a government basis. What should the U.S. do? He's going to be president on January the 20th. This deal is still in place. Iran still continues to do what it's doing. How are you going to...
Well, the president
what would you do about that?
Well, first of all, the president has a lot of options because President Obama didn't do what he should have done, really, under the Constitution. He should have submitted that to the United States Senate. That's a treaty. There's no way of escaping the fact that that's a treaty. If you'd like to go to sleep early tonight, get the Federalist Papers and read Federalist Papers 75, written by Hamilton, who's now a Broadway star as well as a great... and if you want the quintessential definition of a treaty, it's the Iran Agreement. It binds us for more than one president. It binds us for a number of years. It involves a significant area of national security, nuclear power. It should have been submitted to Congress, to the Senate, for a two-thirds vote of the senators present. He never did it. What that means is that deal is over with the present president. The next president can disavow it as a matter of law like that.
And should he?
Well, either he should or he should use that power to renegotiate it, letting them know, I don't have to live by any of this. I mean, none of this is binding on me because he never got the votes. Obama had even a second way he could have done it. He could have done it as an agreement, in which case he would have only had to have gotten a majority vote of the House and Senate. And he knew he couldn't get it.
But it was a deal that was negotiated not only with the Iranians, but with the Russians and the Chinese, the British, and the French, and the Germans. You fancy spending the first 2 years as Secretary of State renegotiating the deal?
No, I think you have to set priorities. So if the priority is let's eliminate ISIS, maybe you put that off a little bit and you get rid of ISIS first, and then you go back to that, because ISIS short term, I believe, is our greatest danger, and not because of ISIS in Iraq and in Syria, but because ISIS did something Al-Qaeda never did. ISIS was able to spread itself around the world. So there are 32 countries that have ISIS cells. The director of the FBI says there are 1,000 investigations in the U.S. So they've created a danger that Al-Qaeda never presented to us in terms of their ability to strike smaller strikes, but still very devastating, like Orlando and Paris and San Bernardino and the priest whose head was chopped off in Nice, which is one that I can't even think about.
Although ISIS seems to be on the run in the region, right? I mean, Mosul is under it.
So I think if you eliminate them where they are, they lose a lot of power in their ability. One of the values, and there were a lot of disadvantages, but one of the values to our having a lot of troops in Iraq and Afghanistan was we kept them on the run. So if you notice, from September 11 until the attack at Fort Hood, there was no Islamic extremist domestic attack in the United States. One of the reasons for that was it's hard to plan an attack when you're being shot at and you're in a cave. Computers don't work really well in a cave. And Al-Qaeda wasn't particularly good at using computers. This new group, ISIS, is different. A lot of them are recruited from us. They come from England. They come from Germany. They come from France. They come from America. They understand us. They understand how to use the internet as well as our children do. And in that sense, that's got to be priority number one. We have to eliminate that threat because we don't want to live with the threat as we have under Obama of what's the next city they're going to hit. Are they going to hit St. Louis? Are they going to hit Chicago? Are they going to go back to Paris? I think once you get that under control, you can start working on the second, which may be long-term problem, which is a great fear of mine, which is a Iranian Shiite kingdom. Because now, to be honest, you would have to say that Iraq is a client state of Iran. And we delivered it to them. Could be the worst mistake in American, probably the worst mistake
Donald
in American foreign policy.
The decision to invade Iraq was the worst decision in American history. Do you agree with that?
No, I think the way we exited Iraq was the worst decision made in American history, which meant we turned them over to Iran. And in turning them over to Iran, we turned Syria over to Iran. And then we weren't there when ISIS began to develop. And so what you have, if you're not careful, what you have developing is, I call it almost a north-south Middle East. You have Iran, Iraq, Syria, with the backing of Russia, Yemen right below Saudi Arabia. So it isn't quite north-south. There's a little bit in the south there. Then you have Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, Qatar, Oman, Egypt, Israel, Jordan, Sunni, the south. That's a war that's going to happen if we don't figure out how to contain Iran and stop them from being nuclear.
Russia, as you just mentioned, is playing an important role there. And there's been a lot of focus on Russia and President-elect Trump's views on Russia. Just simply in your view, is Russia a friend or an adversary?
Both. It's both. Or it could be both. Right now it's adversary because we made it that way. It could be both, just like China. What I'd like to see China is to be an economic competitor, as opposed to a military competitor. Russia thinks it's a military competitor. It really isn't. If you compare the size of our military and theirs, it's our unwillingness under Obama to even threaten the use of our military that makes Russia so powerful.
But would that change what they've done now in Crimea, or what may conceivably
I think
want to do elsewhere?
I believe that it could contain them if we do what Donald Trump talked about in his military agenda, which is we take our military up to 550,000 troops. We were going down to 420,000. We take our Navy up to 350 ships. We were going down to 247. Now, that's really critical, even for China, because at 247, we can't fight a two-ocean war. We gave up the Pacific. At 350, China can't match us in the Pacific. It becomes very different. He's going to take our Marines from about 28 battalions to 36, and he's going to take our Air Force from about 900 fighters that need parts that we have to get from museums.
But what are they all going to do? Because he also seems to be very much against, you know, he was against the Iraq War. He says he's against, you know, the U.S. He's very critical of what the U.S. did in Libya. What are you going to do with all this additional armed force?
He used a phrase that he borrowed from Ronald Reagan, and which Ronald Reagan probably borrowed from George Washington, which is called peace through strength. If you face them with a military that is modern, gigantic, overwhelming, and unbelievably good at conventional and asymmetrical warfare, they may challenge you, but I doubt it.
Okay.
You know, Gorbachev gave Donald Trump the answer to how to win. Gorbachev wrote in one of his memoirs, I think the principal one that he wrote, that Ronald Reagan spent us into oblivion. And I am a big advocate of military spending.
You think the U.S. could do the same with China? So China could be somehow...
I will tell you what happened with China, and I believe this completely, and I've spent a little time in China. I believe you have in China, and I think a lot of people here know China, I think you have in China a tension, not unlike what we have, between, let's call them the hawks and the doves, right? The hawks are military power can really help us grow economically. The doves say, hey, we're so powerful, we're so big, we have so many poor people we have to bring out of poverty, 700 million, that let's become an economic competitor, not a military competitor. So if our Navy is that much bigger than theirs, right, the doves win that war because the hawks can't get the money they need to come and catch us. But if Obama takes our Navy down here and you can kind of catch us, you kind of encourage them. Now, if we take our Navy up here, they're not going to be able to catch us. And here's what I believe and know about the Chinese. Whatever else you think, they are enormously practical people. And they also realize they have two things to overcome that stand in the way of being a great world power. One is the enormous amount of poverty that they have. They are a first world country and a third world country combined, right? Half one, half the other.
Second largest economy in the world, 99.
That second
GDP
part,
per head. Yeah.
someday, if it isn't already, it could be a big problem for them. Second, they have developed such a large middle class, you cannot sustain the oppression, you can't sustain the authoritarianism that they presently have. That's going to crack at some point. And the Chinese are great on all kinds of plans except innovative ones. And they haven't thought their way through that yet.
We've got time for, I really want the participants here, a couple of questions, please. If we could please put your hand up if you have a question. Yes, there's someone over there. I think we've got a microphone right next to you, in fact.
Hi.
Could you identify yourself? Because it's a little dark. We can't see you, sir.
No, I know. Alexandra Lebenthal, CEO of Lebenthal, Mayor Giuliani. I hope you recall that my family, for actually 9 decades this month, has been helping to finance our cities and states through municipal bonds. So I've been CEO of my company for about 15 years, and I have dozens of employees in New York, in Atlanta, in Chicago, and I have always taken care of them. They are my family. And so many of them have expressed to me over the last week how scared they are. And there's a point at which, as a CEO, I can't take care of them anymore. I can't tell them everything is going to be okay. So my question to you, and I say it with great respect, is when will President-elect Trump come out and denounce the very scary things that have already happened, that have affected some of my African-American employees? I need to go back to them tomorrow and tell them that everything's going to be okay.
And what are they afraid of?
They're afraid of having swastikas painted on the wall. I have African-American employees who are truly afraid to be African-American. They're all scared. They've seen what's gone on in the last week, and they're terrified. And I'm terrified for them because, again, I can't take care of them. I can't tell them it's going to be okay. It can't come from me as CEO.
Okay, you can tell them they're going to be okay.
How?
And I'll tell you why they're going to be okay. They're going to be okay because, number one, they have a president of the United States that not only doesn't have a prejudiced bone in his body, and he doesn't, I know him for 28 years, but who has a real commitment to trying to help the African-American community. He didn't begin saying for 4 straight months in every single speech that he gave that he is very concerned about the condition of the African-American community in our inner cities, and that he believes that they should take a look at another alternative to their success than what Democrats have done for them. In every city you can mention, except maybe mine, that had the intervention of a Republican and a somewhat Republican mayor for a while, that's Michael Bloomberg, those cities have completely deteriorated under Democrats. Because the Democratic policy to the African-American community is make them dependent on welfare and food stamps, and don't do a damn thing for them. So what Donald Trump said, let me give you the ladder to success. And here's the ladder to success in America. Number one, a safe community. You can't live in a community like a lot of Chicago where...
Answer my question.
What?
Can you answer my question?
I'm trying to answer your question.
No, you're not answering the question.
Well, tell me how I'm not answering your question.
When is he going to denounce what has already happened? When is he going to do that? When?
What has happened?
Okay,
But-
it's okay.
But to be fair, do you mean? I mean, again, to be fair,
Have you seen what has happened?
but
in this country?
I mean, look, I don't want to get. But he went on 60 Minutes last night. He said directly to the camera, "Stop it!" Right? He said, "Stop it."
Yes, of course he did.
Yeah.
Look.
When I got my answer.
Well,
Didn't he? I mean, he said, "Stop it!" Right? He told people to stop.
yeah, he has told people to stop doing what they're doing. He has no more control over them than President Obama or Hillary Clinton have over the goons and thugs that are in my city, that are destroying property, that are taking over streets, and that are yelling and screaming at Donald Trump. So go ask President Obama, when is he going to tell them to stop it, and when is that going to be effective? He has no more control over it than the goons and thugs in Los Angeles who are destroying property because Donald Trump was elected. So let's be fair about things. Now, if there are crazy people who have come to crazy conclusions about Donald Trump's election, all he can do is tell them to stop it. At least he's done that. I haven't heard Barack Obama say, cut it out, stop demonstrating, stop taking over Fifth Avenue on the streets. It doesn't belong to you. When I was mayor of New York, nobody took my streets. You got to take my sidewalks. You could demonstrate all you wanted on my sidewalks, but my mayor now allows people to block Fifth Avenue. That is dangerous. If you block Fifth Avenue, people die. You can't get them to the hospital on time to get them saved from heart attacks. You can't get to a fire on time. So if you want to say Donald Trump should stop the crazy people from doing the stupid things that they're doing, then you got to say to Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton, will you stop the much larger group of people who are doing crazy things in Los Angeles, in Chicago, and in New York that are doing serious damage?
Rudy, let's move to another question. Please tell me, by the way, that the president is going to live in Washington and isn't going to. Somebody who lives in New York.
The president
is Fifth Avenue going to be that traffic nightmare for the next 4 years?
The president is going to live in Washington, and New York. Hopefully, will have a new mayor next year.
More questions,
who learns how to keep it a civil city.
Yes, here at this table here in front.
Hi, I'm Nick Pinchuk from Snap-on Tools. And first of all, congratulations on winning for the factory workers in Algona and the people in shops in Peoria and places like that. We like to see the experts confounded sometimes. It's the American underdog in terms of elections. but look, I think this is a reasonable question. It has to do with where he's going to live. If you watched Donald Trump during the campaign, at least from a distance, it looked like he was very hands-on, shaping the message himself, working on it on a regular basis, and in fact, defining what his message would be. When you become president, it's generally been said that you have a constant barrage of questions that cannot be decided on the facts. Do you believe he's going to handle that the same way he did his campaign? In other words, immerse himself in it or delegate? That's one question. Can he actually immerse himself, as other presidents have? And then secondly, when he confronts those questions that can't be decided on the facts, that you just can't look at the arithmetic associated with it, what will be his guiding stars? Will it be jobs or?
That's a very good question. Well, first of all, you probably discount somewhat because you don't know him, and maybe a bit of this is his style. Just how reflective and how much he can delve into issues and things. The things he talked about are things he thought a lot about. They're not just things that he spent a great deal of time thinking about the policies that he thought were necessary for the American people. That's the reason he won. Not to relitigate the election, but Hillary Clinton gave very little attention to the policies she would put into effect when she was president. He gave a great deal of attention to the policies he would put into effect when he became president. He talked about immigration. He talked about taxes. He talked about trade. He talked about foreign relations, the Iranian agreement. She didn't talk about any of that. So I think you're giving him a little less credit for the amount of thought that went into what he was saying and what he was doing. I've seen him in many meetings with 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 people, whether we're talking about foreign policy, military policy, or domestic policy, absorb what people were saying. I told you about his change of opinion on what was more important to American business, taxes or regulation. And he came to the conclusion that regulation was more important. So I think you're going to find an extraordinarily intelligent man who enjoys public policy as issues. He's even admitted to me about halfway through the campaign he enjoys it even more than real estate because it's a lot more challenging. And then I think you're going to see him surround himself with highly intelligent people because he's not afraid of highly intelligent people. I think you're going to see him surround himself with people of much higher intellect and of much higher success than we've had in the last 8 years. People.
There's not too many questions. It's going to be just we're really running out of time.
People who challenge him and are willing to challenge him because he's not afraid to be challenged.
Okay, one more question. There's a lady over there with a hand up, please. I think we've just got time for one more. I'm sorry. We could go on much longer.
Hi.
Hi.
It's Julietta Glover, sir. It's nice to see you. So I think you mentioned something a couple minutes ago that would raise the spirits of a lot of people in this room. You talked about tariffs, and when you spoke about it, you talk about other countries lowering their tariffs rather than the United States increasing theirs in response to some sort of trade war scenario. Could you talk a little bit more about that framework, and would it indeed be something that would lead to a global lowering of trade tariffs?
You want me to talk about trade?
Yeah.
Okay. So I think what you're going to find is that probably, gosh, probably than any president that we've had in a long time. We have a president who has spent his time traveling the world and doing business all over the world, right? Our last president had traveled out of the United States maybe 3 times, 4 times.
Oh, he lived in Indonesia.
Yeah, but I mean,
As a child.
Was he in Europe? Was he
Not
in,
much, yeah.
Not much, right? George Bush, not much, right?
Not much.
Okay. So we have somebody who's done business all over the world. He understands the world. He's got a terrific understanding of the fact that we are a global economy. That doesn't mean that we're not also our own economy we have to protect first. And our own economy we have to make consistent with the global economy so that we can get our fair share of the advantages of the global economy. So as he has said many times, but it's never been reported properly, he is not a protectionist. He's a free trader, but a fair trader.
But he's talked about imposing 45% tariff on goods from China. I mean,
Well, so let me leave you with the following thought.
please.
If Donald Trump were going to sell the hotel that he just built here in Washington, right, which may be the best hotel in Washington,
You're staying there.
I don't know how much it's worth. Give me a price. He would ask for double the price to start with.
Okay.
And then he'd probably take less than that. You're dealing with a negotiator. I work for Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan passed one of the largest tax cuts in American history. The one he presented to Tip O'Neill was twice the size of the one that he got. So we're dealing with a man who knows how to negotiate. You know, it's like when he said he wants everybody to pay their fair share in NATO. They interpreted that as we're going to pull out of NATO. We're not going to pull out of NATO. But believe me, he'll get them to pay their fair share of it. Maybe he'll do it by, we'll put a few more troops in, and in exchange for that, if we put more troops in, you got to get up to your 2%. Like, we can't subsidize you any longer because we got a big debt. So I think what you're going to find is somebody negotiating for us for once. I'll give you an example of the difference. When Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton came into office, they gave away the nuclear defense of Poland and the Czech Republic to reset the relationship with Russia. And I was on a panel much like this about 6 months ago with Secretary Gates, who was the defense secretary. And I said to him something that's always troubled me. I said to him, what do we get in return for that? And he said the Spanish word, nada. He was opposed to it. Now, that is a stupid negotiation. I don't know if we ever should have given away the nuclear defense of Poland and the Czech Republic to start with. But if we were going to do it, we had to get something in return for it. So Donald Trump will probably go to Congress and he'll go to the world with an agenda that's a little beyond what he needs, so he has room to negotiate. Just like every one of you do in business. You don't put your house up for sale if it's a $2 million house and you want $2 million for it at $2 million. You put it up at 2.5 or 2.6, and then you end up at 2. If you understand business, if you understand how to negotiate, if you understand how to do foreign relations, if you have no experience in doing that, you do silly things like give away the nuclear defense of Poland and the Czech Republic for nothing, and then Putin concludes from day one, I can push you all over the world because you're not too smart. And I think when you listen to what Donald Trump said during the election, and when you listen to some of the things he proposes, please, as intelligent leaders of business, understand he's doing the same thing you're doing in a deal that you want to make. You don't start at your lowest number. If you do, you're not going to be running your business very long. You start somewhere higher with a plan B and a plan C and a plan D. And that's the complexity with which he thinks. That makes a great president. I work for one. I only worked for one president my whole life, Ronald Reagan. And Ronald Reagan was always underestimated. Ronald Reagan always had a plan A, a plan B, a plan C, and if worse got to worse, he even had a plan D. But he never got really what he wanted.
Mayor Giuliani, it sounds like you are going to have a very busy 4 years.
Thank you.
Can you please join me in thanking Mayor Giuliani? Thank you very much.
Thank you.